Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere so cold that your eyelashes will freeze together if you blink too slowly. We're talking about Yakutia, specifically the Oymyakon region of eastern Siberia, where winter temperatures routinely plunge to minus 71 degrees Celsius, minus 96 degrees Fahrenheit, making it the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth. Picture this: you step outside and take a breath. The air doesn't just feel cold, it burns. Ice crystals form instantly in your nostrils. Your lungs seize slightly because you've just inhaled what feels like shards of frozen glass. Within 30 seconds, any exposed skin begins to sting with the warning signs of frostbite. And here's the kicker: people live here. Not just survive, but live. They raise families, go to work, send their kids to school. You probably won't survive this without some serious preparation, but they do it every single day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how this little community spans the globe. Someone's having breakfast in Tokyo while someone else is winding down in Sao Paulo. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the tiny airport in Yakutsk, the capital of the Sakha Republic, and you've just stepped off a plane from Moscow. The flight took 6 hours, crossing 7 time zones, and you've officially entered a different world. It's late January, deep winter, and the afternoon sky is already dimming into that peculiar twilight that arrives by 3 p.m. this far north. Your contact, a local named Mikhail, meets you with a bear hug that nearly knocks the wind out of you. He's wearing what looks like an entire bear himself. A massive fur coat that hangs to his knees, felt boots called valenki that rise to mid-calf, and a fur hat with ear flaps tied firmly under his chin. You, in your expensive North Face parka that cost $400, suddenly feel laughably underdressed. "Welcome to Yakutia," Mikhail says in accented English, his breath creating a cloud so thick you can barely see his smile through it. "We have special saying here: there is no bad weather, only bad clothing. You will learn this very fast, I think." The drive from Yakutsk to Oymyakon takes about 20 hours in summer. In winter, it can take 3 days, depending on conditions. You're not driving the whole way tonight. Mikhail has arranged for you to stay at a village halfway there. But even this 2-hour journey to the first stop reveals the absolute alienness of this environment. The UAZ van he drives is a Russian-made beast that looks like it was designed by someone who'd only ever seen a vehicle described to them secondhand. It's boxy, utilitarian, and has clearly been modified for extreme cold. The engine has an additional heating system that keeps it warm even when parked. Mikhail explains that if a car engine cools completely in these temperatures, the oil becomes so thick it's essentially solid. Starting a frozen engine isn't just difficult, it can crack the engine block entirely. As you drive through Yakutsk, you notice the city seems to shimmer in an eerie fog. This isn't weather, it's a phenomenon locals call ice fog, created when the extreme cold meets any source of warmth and moisture. Every car exhaust, every heating vent, every breath from every person creates instant condensation that hangs in the air as suspended ice crystals. The entire city exists in this glittering, frozen mist. Streetlights create halos of rainbow light through the ice particles. It's beautiful in a hostile, otherworldly way. The buildings here are bizarre to your eyes. Nothing touches the ground directly. Every structure, homes, apartment blocks, shops, stands on thick stilts driven deep into the earth. Mikhail notices your confused stare. "Permafrost," he says simply. "Ground is frozen to depth of maybe 1,500 meters. Always frozen, even in summer. If we build directly on ground, heat from building melts permafrost underneath. Then building sinks, cracks, falls. Very bad. So we build on stilts, keep cold air flowing under building. This way, ground stays frozen, building stays up. You pass a woman walking her dog, both bundled so completely you can barely tell which is which. The dog, some kind of Siberian breed with thick fur, seems more comfortable than its owner. You learn later that most dogs here are descended from working sled dogs and huskies, breeds literally evolved for this climate. Meanwhile, that Instagram-famous purse dog your neighbor back home coddles in designer sweaters? It would be dead in about 11 minutes out here. Mikhail cranks the van's heater to maximum, and you're grateful. But you also notice he keeps one window cracked about half an inch. When you ask why, he laughs. Too much heat, windows fog from inside. Fog freezes instantly to ice on window. Then we cannot see, we crash, we die. Better to be little bit cold and alive. Yes. The highway, and that's a generous term for what is essentially a packed ice road, stretches ahead into darkness. There are no streetlights once you leave the city. The van's headlights illuminate swirling ice fog and the occasional reflective road marker. Everything beyond that small cone of light is absolute void. You're driving through a frozen nothingness, and the isolation starts to press against your chest. This isn't like a road trip in Canada or Alaska. This is something more primordial, more hostile. 40 minutes into the drive, you see your first roadside memorial. A small wooden cross with a faded photo and some plastic flowers, all encased in ice. Mikhail crosses himself quickly. Truck driver 3 years ago. Engine died, he left cabin to try to fix. They found him next morning, 20 meters from his truck. He almost made it back. You don't ask what almost means at minus 65 degrees Celsius. The temperature reading on the van's dashboard says minus 57 degrees Celsius, minus 71 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're only on the outskirts of Yakutsk. Mikhail mentions casually that Oymyakon, your final destination, regularly sees temperatures 10 to 15 degrees colder. The coldest temperature ever reliably recorded in Oymyakon was minus 67.7 degrees Celsius, minus 89.9 degrees Fahrenheit in 1933, though locals insist it's dropped to minus 71 degrees Celsius or lower in the decades since. Historians still argue whether even colder temperatures were recorded but never officially verified due to thermometer limitations. Some Soviet-era mercury thermometers literally couldn't register below minus 68 degrees Celsius because the mercury froze solid. You spot a cluster of lights ahead. Your first night accommodation in a small village whose name you can't pronounce. The guest house is modest. One large main room with a massive wood-burning stove, several smaller bedrooms, and an indoor toilet, which feels like luxury after Mikhail warned you that many rural homes still use outhouses. The idea of squatting in an outhouse at minus 60 degrees Celsius makes your body clench in sympathetic horror. The owner, a woman named Olga, serves you hot tea and stroganina. Raw frozen fish sliced paper-thin and eaten with salt. It's a traditional sake dish, and it's actually quite good, though the concept of eating sashimi in Siberia feels surreal. The fish freezes within seconds of being caught, preserving it perfectly without any need for refrigeration. Because, well, everything here is a refrigerator. After dinner, you step outside briefly, curious about the cold now that you've stopped moving. The stillness is the first thing that strikes you. No wind, no sound. The air is so cold that it's become heavy, pressing down, suppressing everything. You can hear your heartbeat in your ears. You take a breath, and yes, Mikhail was right, it burns. Your nostrils stick together slightly with each inhale. You produce a massive cloud of breath fog that hangs in the air long after you've exhaled, drifting slowly in the weak light from the guesthouse window. You look up, and the stars are incredible. With no light pollution and air this cold and clear, the sky is a chaos of light. The Milky Way is a bright smear across the black. You think you might see the northern lights flickering green on the horizon, but you're not sure. Everything about this place defies your frame of reference. Back inside, warming your hands around another cup of tea, Olga shows you a photo on her phone. It's her granddaughter, maybe 4 years old, bundled in a tiny fur coat. The child is crying in the photo, and you can see the tear tracks on her cheeks, frozen solid, like tiny icicles clinging to her face. Olga smiles fondly at the image. "This is Yakutia," she says through Mikhail's translation. Even the tears freeze before they can fall. You lie in bed that night under a pile of blankets so heavy you can barely turn over, listening to the absolute silence outside, and you wonder, not for the last time, what kind of people choose to build a life in a place that seems fundamentally hostile to human existence. Tomorrow you'll learn. You wake to the sound of Mikhail stomping snow off his boots in the main room. and the acrid smell of strong black tea brewing on Olga's stove. Your phone says it's 8:47 a.m., but outside the window, the world is still dark. Not dawn dark, not twilight dark, dark dark. This deep into winter, this far north, sunrise doesn't happen until nearly 10 a.m., and sunset arrives around 3 p.m. You're getting about 5 hours of weak daylight, and the rest is this pressing, absolute darkness that makes your circadian rhythm throw up its hands in confusion. Mikhail hands you a cup of tea with a knowing grin. You sleep good? Not too cold. You did sleep, actually, once you burrowed deep enough under the blankets that only your nose was exposed. That nose, however, is now slightly chapped and tender. A reminder that even indoors, the air is dry enough to desiccate exposed skin. Before you continue toward Oymyakon, Mikhail wants to show you something. You bundle back into your layers, thermal underwear, fleece, the parka, the hat, the gloves, and step outside. The cold hits you like a physical wall. It's minus 61 degrees Celsius this morning, minus 78 degrees Fahrenheit, and your body's response is immediate and visceral. Every exposed millimeter of skin screams. Your eyes water reflexively, and those tears freeze at the corners before they can roll down your cheeks. You understand Olga's photo now in a way you didn't last night. Mikhail hands you a cup of boiling water. Watch, he says, and flings the water into the air. It doesn't arc and splash. It doesn't fall. It explodes into a cloud of ice crystals that hang suspended for a moment before drifting down like snow. The water never touches the ground as liquid. The transformation from boiling to frozen happens mid-air, instantaneously. It's a party trick here, something locals do to impress visitors, but it's also a perfect demonstration of just how cold the air is. The temperature differential is so extreme that thermodynamic equilibrium is achieved before gravity can complete its work. Now, Mikhail says, I teach you the science of not dying. He's only half joking. Your body, right now, is engaged in a desperate battle against entropy. Human beings maintain a core temperature around 37 degrees Celsius, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. The air around you is nearly 100 degrees Celsius colder than your body. Heat transfer between objects or between your body and the environment occurs at a rate proportional to the temperature difference. The bigger the gap, the faster you lose heat. And you're dealing with one of the biggest possible gaps. Your body is trying to compensate through several mechanisms. First, vasoconstriction. The blood vessels in your extremities are constricting, reducing blood flow to your fingers, toes, nose, and ears to preserve heat for your vital organs. This is why frostbite hits extremities first. Your body is literally sacrificing them to save your heart and brain. Smart from an evolutionary standpoint, but rough on your fingers. Second, shivering thermogenesis. Your muscles are starting to contract rapidly, generating heat through friction. You'll burn calories at maybe 3 times your normal rate just standing here. Third, increased metabolism. Your thyroid kicks into overdrive, your liver works harder, all producing heat as a byproduct. But here's the problem. These mechanisms evolved for cold weather, not for this. Humans developed in Africa. We're tropical apes who learned to tolerate temperate climates and then, through technology and sheer stubbornness, pushed into genuinely hostile environments. Your body can handle minus 10 degrees Celsius, even minus 20 degrees Celsius, for extended periods if you're dressed properly. At minus 60 degrees Celsius, you're operating beyond your biological design specifications. Mikhail points to his face, specifically to the area around his mouth where his beard has become a solid mass of ice from his breath. You must learn to breathe correct. Small breaths through nose. Your nose warms air before it reaches lungs. Big gulps through mouth. He demonstrates, taking a huge breath with his mouth open. You freeze inside of lungs. Very painful, can cause damage. He's right about this. At extreme cold, rapid breathing of unwarmed air can cause bronchoconstriction, coughing, and in severe cases, can damage lung tissue. The moisture in your breath freezes inside your respiratory tract. Historians still argue whether early polar explorers understood this mechanism or just learned through trial and painful error, but the Saka people have known it for centuries. Frostbite is the other major concern. and Mikhail is almost clinical in his explanation. First degree, skin turns white, feels numb. This is frostnip, not so bad. You warm it, you recover, no problem. Second degree, skin freezes deeper, blisters form when you thaw. Painful, but usually okay. Third degree, tissue freezes completely, dies, turns black when you thaw. Needs amputation. He wiggles his left hand, and you notice for the first time that he's missing the tip of his pinky finger. Fourth degree, bone freezes. Very bad. Usually lose whole finger, whole toe, maybe more. The timeline for frostbite here is terrifying. At minus 60 degrees Celsius with even a slight breeze, exposed skin can develop frostbite in under 5 minutes. In calm conditions, maybe 10 minutes. Your fancy parka is rated for minus 40 degrees Celsius, which is impressive by normal standards but barely adequate here. Mikhail's layering system is instructive. Thin moisture-wicking layer against the skin, thick wool middle layer, fur outer layer. The fur isn't just traditional, it's functional. Fur traps air in a way synthetic materials can't quite replicate, and in still air, that trapped layer is your best insulator. Back inside, warming up again, which itself is painful. The returning blood flow to your extremities creates intense tingling. Mikhail pulls out a scientific thermometer and shows you something fascinating. He pours a small amount of vegetable oil into a metal dish and places it outside. You watch through the window as the oil becomes cloudy, then sluggish, then solid. Takes about 4 minutes. Motor oil does the same thing, which is why vehicles here need specially formulated low-viscosity oil. Regular motor oil would become solid enough to prevent engines from turning over. Everything changes in the cold, Mikhail explains. Metal becomes brittle, can snap like glass. Rubber becomes hard, cracks. Plastic shatters. Batteries die very fast because chemical reactions slow down. Phone battery that lasts all day in Moscow. Here, maybe 30 minutes outside. He's not exaggerating. Lithium-ion batteries lose about 20% of their capacity at minus 20 degrees Celsius. At minus 60 degrees Celsius, they can lose 70% or more. Your phone, your GPS, your emergency beacon, all useless without constant warmth. There's a quirky phenomenon that locals deal with constantly. Breath condensation doesn't just freeze in the air. It freezes on any surface it touches. If you spend any time outside talking, say waiting for a bus, your scarf will become a solid board of ice from your frozen breath. Your face mask becomes rigid. That magnificent beard the hipsters back home are so proud of, it becomes a face cage of ice that has to be carefully thawed before you can even open your mouth fully. Mikhail shows you his vehicle maintenance routine. Every time he parks for more than an hour or two, he covers the engine compartment with heavy insulated blankets. Many vehicles here have engine block heaters, electric heaters that keep the engine warm when plugged in. Some people literally never turn their vehicles off during winter, letting them run 24/7 for months because restarting a frozen engine is nearly impossible. The fuel consumption is significant, but it's cheaper than a new engine or, freezing to death because your car died. You ask about wildlife because surely nothing can live in this, right? Wrong. Mikhail explains that the Saka horses, small, stocky animals with thick winter coats, live outside year-round. They're partially domesticated, but mostly just tough. They paw through the snow to find frozen grass, which they eat. Their metabolism is fascinating. They process food differently in winter, extracting maximum calories from minimal nutrition. Reindeer do the same thing, along with a specialized nasal structure that pre-warms the air they breathe. Evolution finds a way even here. The human adaptations are cultural and technological rather than biological. The Saka people have lived in this region for over 1,000 years, migrating here from areas further south. They brought with them knowledge of horse breeding, reindeer herding, and metalworking, and they adapted it all to this extreme environment. Their traditional winter homes, called balagan, were semi-underground structures insulated with earth and moss. Modern homes use different materials but follow similar principles. Minimize heat loss, maximize insulation, never ever build directly on permafrost. There's a scholarly debate about whether the Saka people originally chose this region or were pushed here by conflicts with other groups. Some historians argue that Yakutia was a refuge, so inhospitable that enemies wouldn't follow. Others suggest it was the region's wealth of resources, furs, fish, later diamonds, and gold, that drew settlers despite the brutal climate. Either way, the result is a population that has survived and thrived in conditions that would kill an unprepared outsider in hours. Before you leave for the next leg of the journey, Olga shows you one more thing. She takes a raw egg, carries it outside, and sets it on a wooden post. In less than a minute, the egg is frozen solid. Not just cold, but solid enough that when she taps it against the post, it clinks like a stone. She brings it back inside and sets it near the stove. As it thaws, it's perfectly edible. The cold here isn't just an inconvenience. It's a preservation system, a storage solution, a fundamental fact of daily life that shapes every decision. You climb back into the UAZ van, and Mikhail starts the engine, which he'd left running for the past hour. The dashboard thermometer reads -59 degrees Celsius. You've got another full day of driving ahead, through some of the most remote and hostile terrain on Earth, toward a destination that makes this village look tropical by comparison. Your body is already exhausted from the constant metabolic battle against the cold, and you haven't even reached Oymyakon yet. But you're beginning to understand something important. Survival here isn't about toughness or bravado. It's about knowledge, preparation, and a healthy respect for an environment that is fundamentally, absolutely, lethally indifferent to your existence. The engine hums, the heater blasts, and you drive deeper into the frozen heart of Yakutia. The landscape you're driving through is monochrome. White snow, black trees, gray sky. The forest here is predominantly larch, a deciduous conifer that drops its needles in winter, leaving skeletal black branches against the snow. It's one of the few tree species that can survive this far north. And even then, they're stunted, growing slowly over decades to reach heights that trees in temperate climates achieve in years. You pass through sections where the trees are barely taller than the van, ancient but small, twisted by wind and cold into shapes that look almost deliberate, like natural bonsai. Mikhail points out a small settlement ahead, maybe a dozen buildings clustered around what looks like a central square. Smoke rises from every chimney, straight up in thick columns because there's no wind to disperse it. "We stop here," he says. "You see how people live." The village is called Tomtor, and it's home to maybe 200 people, though Mikhail says that number fluctuates as younger people leave for cities and older folks, well, don't. You park near what appears to be the general store, one of those multi-purpose buildings that serves as grocery, post office, and community gathering spot. Even with the engine left running, the cold is immediate and aggressive when you open the door. Your earlier acclimatization means nothing. This is -63 degrees Celsius, -81 degrees Fahrenheit, and your body registers it as a threat. Inside the store, the warmth is overwhelming. They keep it heated to at least 25 degrees Celsius, and the temperature shock makes you dizzy for a moment. The shopkeeper, a middle-aged man named Yuri, greets Mikhail like family. They're probably related somehow. In communities this small, everyone's connected by blood, marriage, or just decades of proximity. The store's inventory is fascinating in its pragmatism. Entire shelves devoted to candles, batteries, matches, lighter fluid. Another section with thermal underwear, wool socks, face masks. There's a chest freezer against one wall, which seems absurd until Yuri explains through Mikhail that it's actually a warmer. In winter, they use it to keep food from freezing too hard. Vegetables stored outside become solid as rocks and can shatter if dropped. In the freezer, set to -10 degrees Celsius, they stay frozen but manageable. The fresh produce section is sparse. Some potatoes, onions, carrots, all looking a bit tired from the journey up from Yakutsk. Fresh fruit is almost non-existent and wildly expensive when available. An apple costs about the equivalent of $3. Bananas are a rare luxury. Most nutrition comes from preserved foods, frozen fish and meat, and whatever vegetables people manage to grow during the brief summer and preserve through canning or root cellaring. Yuri shows you his pricing system. Everything costs more here than in Yakutsk, which already costs more than in Moscow. Transportation markup is brutal. Fuel is expensive, roads are dangerous, and supply trucks break down constantly. But the bigger issue is refrigeration, or rather, the lack thereof. Anything that needs to stay above freezing during transport requires heated trucks, which burn even more fuel. A liter of milk that costs 60 rubles in Moscow costs 180 here. Nobody complains because what's the alternative? You ask Yuri about daily life. What does a normal day look like here? He laughs and says through Mikhail, "Normal? There is no normal. There is only surviving until summer, then preparing for winter." But he elaborates, "Wake around 8 a.m. when it's still dark. Start the stove if it burned down overnight. Check the livestock if you have any. Horses and reindeer can survive outside, but cattle need shelter. Go to work if you have work." Most people here are involved in reindeer herding, mining, there are small gold deposits in the region, or providing services to the community. Come home by 3 p.m. before it gets dark again. Eat dinner, keep the stove fed, sleep, repeat. Social life happens indoors, obviously. Yuri mentions community dinners, card games, a lot of television. Internet exists, but it's slow and expensive, satellite connections mostly. The younger generation is on their phones constantly, watching TikTok or YouTube when the connection allows, staying connected to a world that feels impossibly distant from here. The cultural gap between kids growing up with social media showing them tropical beaches and their reality of 9-month winters is creating some tension. More young people are leaving than staying. Mikhail buys supplies, dried fish, tea, chocolate, cigarettes, and you head back out into the cold. He wants to show you a working household, and you drive another kilometer to a small house on the edge of the village. The home belongs to his cousin Anatoly and his wife Svetlana. They have 3 children, a teenager named Dmitry, a 10-year-old daughter named Sasha, and a 4-year-old boy named Kolya. The house is typical of the region, raised on thick stilts about 2 meters off the ground, walls built with triple-layer insulation, tiny windows with triple pane glass. The entrance is through a sani, a kind of Arctic mudroom or airlock, where you remove your outer layers before entering the main living space. This design is crucial. Opening a door directly from heated interior to exterior would cause massive heat loss and create ice buildup from condensation. Inside, the home is warm, almost cozy. A massive wood-burning stove dominates the main room, radiating heat. Svetlana has a pot of something simmering on top, venison stew, you learn later, made from meat Anatoly hunted in autumn. The smell is incredible, rich and savory. The walls are decorated with family photos, children's drawings, and a Russian Orthodox icon in one corner with a small candle burning beneath it. Svetlana offers tea and pastries, and you sit at their kitchen table while the kids eye you with that mix of curiosity and shyness that children everywhere display toward strangers. Kolya, the 4-year-old, is wearing indoor clothes, light pants and a long-sleeve shirt, and playing with toy trucks on the floor. He looks like any preschooler anywhere, which is somehow surreal given that outside the world is lethally cold. Anatoly explains the logistics of maintaining a household here. Firewood is everything. They burn through approximately 8 to 10 cubic meters of wood per winter month. That's roughly 2,500 kilograms of wood every 30 days just to keep the house heated. He spends most of late summer and autumn cutting, splitting, and stacking wood. Some people here use coal, which burns longer and hotter, but it's more expensive and has to be trucked in. Wood they can harvest locally. Water is another challenge. The house has indoor plumbing, but it's a constant battle against freezing. The pipes are insulated and have heating cables wrapped around them, electric wires that keep the pipes just warm enough to prevent ice blockage. If the power goes out, they have maybe 4 to 6 hours before the pipes start freezing. When that happens, you're looking at burst pipes and a repair job that's difficult and expensive in these conditions. Some older homes still rely on hauling water from wells or rivers, storing it in indoor barrels. The toilet is fascinating from an engineering perspective. The drain pipe is heated and insulated, but there's also a constant slight flow of water through the system, a trickle that never stops, because moving water is harder to freeze than standing water. Their electric bill is astronomical by Russian standards, but again, what's the option? Cooking happens on a combination electric and wood-burning stove. Svetlana mentions that she plans meals carefully because running to the store for a forgotten ingredient isn't like hopping in the car in California. In deep winter, She doesn't leave the house for days at a time. Everything has to be on hand. Flour, sugar, salt, oil, preserved vegetables, frozen meat. She shows you her pantry. Shelves stocked like a prepper's bunker. But this isn't paranoia, it's necessity. School is another daily challenge. Sasha and Dmitry attend the village school, about 400 meters from home. The school has a policy. If the temperature drops below -52 degrees Celsius, classes are canceled for younger children. Below -55 degrees Celsius, all classes are canceled. But between -40 degrees Celsius and -52 degrees Celsius, kids are expected to attend. Svetlana walks Sasha to school on those days, both of them bundled to near immobility. The walk takes about 8 minutes. 8 minutes in -48 degrees Celsius air. Sasha has gotten frostbite on her cheeks twice. Minor, first-degree stuff that healed, but it's treated as a normal childhood injury here, like a scraped knee elsewhere. Dmitry, being a teenager, refuses to be walked to school and goes with his friends. Svetlana worries constantly but knows she can't coddle him. Learning to navigate the cold is a survival skill, something he needs to master before adulthood. Still, she watches from the window until he's out of sight, every single morning. Young Kolya doesn't go outside much in deep winter. When he does, he's so thoroughly bundled that he can barely move. Svetlana shows you his outdoor gear. A fur-lined snowsuit, felt boots 3 sizes too big to allow for multiple layers of wool socks, mittens attached to the coat with clips so he can't lose them, a face mask that covers everything except his eyes. He looks like a tiny astronaut preparing for EVA. And then Svetlana shows you the photo, the one you saw on Olga's phone or one like it. Kolya crying, tears frozen on his cheeks. He fell in the snow, she explains through Mikhail. He was outside maybe 2 minutes. He was scared, he cried. By the time I picked him up, the tears had frozen. They didn't fall. They just stayed there on his face, little ice beads. She's matter-of-fact about it, but you can see the motherly concern underneath, holding a crying child whose tears freeze before they can fall. It's such a visceral image of what it means to raise a family here. The children's existence is this bizarre split between normal childhood and constant environmental threat. Kolya plays with toys and watches cartoons, but he's also learning which clothing combinations keep you alive and which spots on your skin need extra protection. Sasha does homework and chats with friends online, but she also knows how to recognize the early signs of hypothermia and what to do if she falls through ice. Dmitry is navigating teenage independence and romance, but the stakes of poor decision-making here aren't a hangover or an embarrassing story. They're death. Anatoly shows you his workshop, a small insulated shed behind the house. He repairs tools, maintains their snowmobile, and works on various projects. The space has its own heater that he runs before working because metal tools at -60 degrees Celsius will freeze to your skin on contact. He once picked up a wrench without gloves and lost a layer of skin from his palm when he tried to release it. The metal conducts heat away from your body so rapidly that it causes instant cold burns. The snowmobile is their lifeline for much of winter. Roads become impassable even for the hardy Russian vehicles, but a snowmobile can navigate almost anything. They use it for hunting, for visiting neighbors, for emergencies. Anatoly maintains it obsessively because a breakdown 10 kilometers from home in -60 degrees Celsius weather is a potential death sentence. Before you leave, Svetlana insists you stay for lunch. She serves the venison stew with homemade bread and pickled vegetables she canned last summer. The meal is simple but delicious, and the warmth of it, both temperature and emotional, feels like a gift. This family, living in conditions that would be considered uninhabitable by most of humanity, still creates a home. They still laugh at dinner jokes, still argue about who's doing dishes, still have that domestic normalcy that transcends environment. As you're bundling up to leave, Kolya approaches shyly and hands you a drawing he made. A crayon picture of a house with smoke coming from the chimney and stick figures in winter clothes standing outside. The sun is shining, which is optimistic given the current darkness, and there are stars in the sky even though it's daytime in his drawing. Children don't understand day-night cycles the way adults do, especially when darkness dominates so much of their early life. Outside, the cold is waiting. It's always waiting. The sun has finally risen, a weak yellow disk that hangs low on the horizon, providing light but almost no warmth. The temperature has actually risen. It's only minus 58 degrees Celsius now, which feels almost balmy after the past few days. Almost. You think about Svetlana holding Kolya, wiping away tears that had turned to ice crystals. You think about Sasha walking to school in cold that would kill an unprepared adult in minutes. You think about Dmitri trying to be a normal teenager in a place where normal includes calculations of survival. And you realize that daily life here isn't some grand adventure or extreme sport. It's just life. Mundane, repetitive, occasionally boring, punctuated by moments of beauty and connection and fear. It just happens to take place in an environment where the margin for error is non-existent and the temperature can kill you faster than you can make a decision. Tomorrow, you'll finally reach Oymyakon. But tonight, you're staying in Tomtor, in a guest house similar to the first, and you're grateful for the wood stove, the heavy blankets, and the reminder that humanity's greatest survival tool has never been claws or fangs or thick fur. It's been the ability to come in from the cold, share a meal, and tell ourselves that tomorrow will be worth the struggle of today. The drive to Oymyakon takes another full day, and the landscape becomes even more desolate as you push deeper into the Saka interior. The forest thins out, replaced by vast stretches of white tundra interrupted by rocky outcroppings that jut through the snow like broken teeth. The road, and you're using that term very generously, is mostly packed snow and ice, marked by occasional posts that show where the route runs. Without those markers, you'd be driving blind across a featureless white expanse. Mikhail drives with the steady confidence of someone who's made this trip dozens of times. But even he admits the conditions are challenging today. The temperature has dropped to minus 67 degrees Celsius, minus 88.6 degrees Fahrenheit, and the UAZ's heater is struggling to keep up. You can see frost forming on the inside corners of the windows despite the one we cracked for ventilation. Your breath adds to the moisture problem, so you've learned to breathe shallowly through a scarf. You arrive in Oymyakon just after 2 p.m., with maybe 90 minutes of weak daylight remaining. The village is smaller than you expected, fewer than 500 permanent residents, and it sits in a valley surrounded by low mountains. This valley location is part of what makes it so cold. Dense, frigid air sinks and collects here like water pooling in a basin. The town's name reportedly comes from the Saka word hayam, meaning frozen water or unfrozen patch, referring to a nearby hot spring where reindeer herders once watered their animals. The irony of the coldest inhabited place being named for unfrozen water is not lost on anyone. Your accommodation is with a family, Nikolai and Yana, and their 2 children, 12-year-old Victor and 7-year-old Katia. Their home is slightly larger than Anatoly's, with an additional room that they rent to the occasional journalist, researcher, or crazy person who wants to experience extreme cold. You qualify as at least one of those categories. Yana greets you with the same bone-crushing hospitality you've come to expect, ushering you into the warmth and pressing hot tea into your hands before you've even removed all your layers. Katia peeks around the doorframe, curious about the visitor, while Victor affects teenage indifference, but you catch him glancing your way repeatedly. That evening, after a dinner of fish soup and black bread, Nikolai talks about raising children in Oymyakon. His perspective is different from Svetlana's, more philosophical, maybe, or just more willing to articulate the strangeness of it all to an outsider. When Victor was born, he says, "I stood outside the hospital in Yakutsk. Yana had to give birth there, we have no hospital here, and I thought about bringing him back to this place. It was summer, warm, maybe 25 degrees Celsius. I thought, why would I take my son to a place where winter wants to kill him?" He pauses, sipping his tea. Victor is in the other room, presumably out of earshot, but you suspect he's heard this story before. "But this is my home, my father's home, his father's before him. The Saka people have lived in Yakutia for maybe 40 generations. We know how to survive the cold. We know which clothes to wear, which foods to eat, how to build homes that don't fall into the permafrost. This knowledge, it's ours, and if we don't pass it to our children, it dies. So yes, I brought Victor home, and then Katia, and I teach them what my father taught me." Yana adds, "But it's different now. Victor has internet. He sees how other children live. He watches videos of kids in Moscow, in Europe, in America. They don't worry about frostbite walking to school. They don't have to keep their phones inside their coats to keep the batteries alive. And he asks me, "Why do we live here?" "What do you tell him?" you ask. She smiles, but it's complicated. I tell him that easy lives make weak people. I tell him that he's learning strength that most people will never need and never understand. I tell him that there's honor in continuing tradition, in not abandoning the place your ancestors built. And does he believe you? Some days yes, some days no. He's 12. Some days he believes nothing we say. Nikolai laughs at that, the universal laugh of parents dealing with adolescence. The next morning, you're invited to walk Katia to school. It's minus 64 degrees Celsius, which is cold enough that school would normally be canceled. But the temperature briefly rose to minus 51 degrees Celsius around 10 a.m., so the decision was made to hold classes. By the time you're walking with Katia at noon, it's dropped again, but the policy is based on morning temperature. Katia is bundled until she's nearly spherical. Her mother has layered her with precision. Thermal underwear, wool tights, wool dress, thick sweater, snow pants, felt boots with fur lining, a heavy coat, a wool scarf wrapped around her face leaving only her eyes exposed, mittens over glove liners, and a fur hat tied tightly under her chin. She can barely bend her arms. She walks with the stiff-legged waddle of a child in too many clothes. You're walking beside her, also bundled, and Yana is on her other side. The school is about 300 meters away, a 3-minute walk in normal conditions. Here, you move carefully, watching for ice patches, breathing shallowly through scarves. Katia doesn't complain. This is her normal. Halfway there, another child joins you, a neighbor girl about Katia's age. They try to chat, but talking is difficult. Each word creates a puff of breath fog that freezes into ice crystals on their scarves. They mostly walk in silence, occasionally pointing at things or making small gestures. You notice how the children move carefully but not fearfully. They've internalized the danger without letting it paralyze them. Katia knows to keep her hands moving inside her mittens, knows not to breathe too deeply, knows to watch for the warning signs of frostbite. The tingling, the numbness, the waxy white appearance of skin. At the school entrance, mothers are clustered, having walked their children. Some have pulled aside scarves to talk, creating small clouds of frozen breath that hang in the air between them. They're sharing news, gossip, the social maintenance that happens in communities everywhere, just adapted to conditions where prolonged outdoor conversation risks hypothermia. Yana unwraps Katia's scarf, checks her face for frostbite, and gives her a kiss on the forehead. Katia's cheeks are red but not white. She's fine. She disappears into the school with her friend, and Yana turns to you. You want to see something? You follow her around the side of the school building to a small playground, swings, a slide, some climbing equipment. Everything is covered in thick frost. Yana walks up to one of the swing chains and wraps her gloved hand around it. Then she squeezes. The chain shatters. Actually shatters like glass, breaking into several pieces that fall to the snow. The metal becomes brittle, she explains. You cannot use playground equipment in deep winter. It breaks, children get hurt. So in winter, they play inside. Always inside. You think about that, children who can't play outside for 6, 7, 8 months of the year. Recess happens in the gymnasium. Running around happens in hallways under teachers' watchful eyes. The basic childhood experience of outdoor play is compressed into a brief summer window. Back at Nikolai and Yana's home, you spend the afternoon observing the rhythm of domestic life. Katia returns from school around 3 p.m., just as the sun is setting. She sheds her layers in the seine, coming into the main room looking tired. School is exhausting here in ways that have nothing to do with academics. The sheer physical effort of staying warm, of moving in heavy clothing, of breathing cold air, drains children in ways their southern counterparts never experience. Victor comes home an hour later. He's at the age where he walks alone with friends, asserting independence. Yana tries not to hover, but you can see the relief in her eyes when he comes through the door safely. At 12, he's old enough to know the dangers but not always old enough to respect them fully. That's the terrifying equation of parenting teenagers anywhere, but here the stakes are existential. Homework happens at the kitchen table. Katia practices reading, sounding out words while Yana prepares dinner. Victor works on mathematics, and his frustration with a problem has nothing to do with the weather. It's just normal kid homework struggle. These moments of ordinariness are startling in their mundanity. But then Katia asks if she can go to her friend's house tomorrow after school, and the calculation that follows is pure oymycon. Yana asks which friend, how far, who would walk with her, what the temperature forecast is. The friend lives 4 houses down, maybe 150 meters, but that's still 150 meters of exposure. Yana agrees, but only if an adult walks both ways, and only if the temperature stays above -60 degrees Celsius. Nikolai mentions that Victor wants to join the school's reindeer herding club, which operates in spring and fall when conditions are less extreme. It's part of preserving traditional knowledge, teaching children skills their ancestors relied on. But it's also practical. Some of these kids will grow up to be herders, continuing the work that sustained the Saka people for generations. After dinner, the family watches television together, a Russian game show that's probably filmed in Moscow in a heated studio with palm plants in the background. The disconnect is surreal. Victor is scrolling on his phone simultaneously, watching TikTok videos of teenagers in tropical locations doing dances in swimsuits. He looks up, catches you watching him, and shrugs with a self-awareness that's almost painful. Later, when the children are in bed, you ask Nikolai the question that's been building. Do they ever consider leaving? He's quiet for a long moment. Every winter, yes, every winter there are mornings when the stove has burned too low and the house is cold, and getting up means facing that cold, and I think, why? Why do we do this? There are places where winter means putting on a jacket, not 3 layers and a survival calculation. But you stay. We stay, because this is ours. Because leaving feels like failure, like admitting that the cold won. Because there is something in us, in the Saka people, that refuses to be driven out by temperature. Yana adds, and because we worry what happens if everyone leaves. Who keeps the knowledge alive? Who maintains the traditions? If everyone goes to Yakutsk, to Moscow, to warm places, then in 2 generations no one knows how to survive here. And this place, it has value, resources, history. It deserves to have people who know it, who can live in it. What about your children's choice? You ask. Victor will probably leave, Nikolai says bluntly. He talks about university in Yakutsk, maybe Moscow. We don't stop him. Katia is younger, harder to predict. But we teach them both how to survive here, so if they choose to return, they can. And if they don't return, at least they carry with them the knowledge that they survived something most people cannot imagine. That night, you lie in bed listening to the house creak in the cold. Wood contracts, metal shrinks, everything tightens. It sounds like the building is breathing, adjusting, finding equilibrium with the lethal air outside. You think about Katia's bundled morning walk, about Victor's TikTok feed showing him warm weather lives he may someday choose. You think about Yana checking her daughter's face for frostbite at the school entrance, about Nikolai's quiet admission that every winter brings doubt. You think about childhood here, truncated outdoor time, layers of clothing that restrict movement, constant awareness of environmental threat. But also, close family bonds forged by shared survival, early independence born from necessity, knowledge and skills that make these children extraordinarily capable. And you think about that image again, the crying child, tears frozen on their cheeks. It's become emblematic in your mind. The intersection of human vulnerability and environmental extremity, of parental love in a place that seems designed to test it. Just before you drift off to sleep, you hear a soft sound from the other room, Katia coughing. It's a normal sound, a child with a cold sound. But here, where respiratory infections can become serious quickly, where going to a hospital means a 20-hour drive, even a cough carries extra weight. Yana's footsteps, the murmur of comfort, water being poured. Even in the coldest inhabited place on Earth, parents get up in the night to comfort sick children. Some things transcend temperature. Morning brings a curiosity you haven't yet explored. How did people live here before modern technology? Before snowmobiles and heated homes and internet connections to the wider world? Nikolai, sensing your interest, offers to introduce you to his uncle, Alexei, who at 73 is one of the village elders and a keeper of traditional knowledge. Alexei's home is older than most in Oymyakon, built in a style that predates some of the modern insulation techniques. It's still on stilts, still triple-walled, but there's something more authentic about it. Hand-hewn timbers, traditional joinery, a stove built from stones rather than metal. The man himself is compact and weathered, with a face that looks like it's been carved from wood and left in the wind. His hands are massive, scarred from decades of work, and he greets you with a grip that makes your bones shift. Through Nikolai's translation, Alexei explains that he grew up in a balagan, a traditional Saka winter dwelling. These structures were partially underground, with earth walls banked up for insulation. The roof was made from larch poles covered with birch bark and turf. Inside, a central fire pit provided heat, and smoke escaped through a hole in the roof. The floor was layered with furs and reindeer hides. In deep winter, the interior temperature might reach only 5 degrees Celsius to 10 degrees Celsius, but that was warm enough when you're wearing furs and sleeping under piled hides. We lived differently then, Alexei says, his voice rough from age and cigarettes. Not better, not worse. Different. We knew the cold as an enemy, yes, but also as a companion. It was always there. You learned to work with it. He shows you photographs from his youth, black and white images from the 1960s and 70s. Men in traditional fur clothing standing beside reindeer herds. Women processing fish by a frozen river, their hands bare despite the cold because you can't gut fish wearing mittens. Children bundled in furs that make them look like small bears. The Saka people, Alexei explains, migrated to this region from areas further south around the 13th or 14th century, though historians still argue about the exact timeline and reasons. They brought with them horses and cattle, which they adapted to the extreme cold through selective breeding. The Saka horse, small, stocky, with a winter coat so thick it looks shaggy, can survive outside in temperatures below -60 degrees Celsius. They dig through snow to find frozen grass, and their bodies metabolize food with remarkable efficiency. Reindeer, though, were the real survival technology. The Saka adopted reindeer herding from the Even and Evenki peoples who were already in the region. Reindeer provided meat, milk, hides for clothing and shelter, sinew for thread, bones for tools. A reindeer's fur is hollow, creating incredible insulation. Traditional Saka winter clothing was made from reindeer hide with the fur turned inward against the skin and outward for an additional layer. Between those two layers, air trapped in the hollow hairs created a thermal barrier that synthetic materials still struggle to match. Alexei pulls out a traditional winter coat from a trunk. It's enormous, heavy, and when you lift it, you understand immediately how effective it would be. The fur is dense, the construction meticulous. Every seam is sealed with sinew thread to prevent air infiltration. The hood is deep and lined with wolverine fur around the face opening because wolverine fur has a unique property. Human breath doesn't freeze onto it the way it does with other furs. My grandfather made this, Alexei says with quiet pride. He taught me to sew, to choose the right hides, to know which animal's fur works best for which purpose. This knowledge, it kept us alive for 30, 40 generations before Russians came with their cloth and metal. The Russians did come, of course, pushing into Siberia in the 16th and 17th centuries, seeking furs and empire. The Saka people were eventually absorbed into the Russian Empire, then the Soviet Union. Soviet collectivization in the 1930s disrupted traditional herding patterns and family structures. People were forced into villages, reindeer herds were collectivized, and traditional nomadic movements were restricted. But the knowledge survived, passed from grandparent to grandchild, preserved in communities like this one. Alexei learned traditional crafts from his grandfather because his father was away working in Soviet mines. When the Soviet Union collapsed and the economy shattered, those traditional skills suddenly became survival tools again. Hunting, fishing, herding, fur working, all of it returned to relevance. Alexei takes you outside, briefly, because he's old and the cold is harder on him now, to show you a traditional kutter, a wooden storehouse built on high stilts. These structures kept food away from animals and, more importantly, kept frozen food frozen at the right temperature. Too warm, meaning anywhere above -20 degrees Celsius, and meat could begin to deteriorate. The permafrost provides natural refrigeration, but you still need to manage airflow and temperature. Inside the storehouse, you see the traditional diet preserved. Frozen fish stacked like cordwood, each one solid as stone. Blocks of venison and horse meat. The stroganina you ate your first night is a traditional dish precisely because freezing was the original preservation method. You catch the fish, it freezes within minutes, and it stays perfectly preserved for months. When you're ready to eat it, you shave off thin slices while it's still frozen. The texture is unique, not quite raw, not quite cooked, something in between. Back inside Alexei's home, warming up again, he talks about seasonal cycles that govern traditional Saka life. Winter was for staying relatively stationary, conserving energy, living off stored food. Spring was for fishing when rivers broke up, a crucial time to replenish food stores. Summer, brief but intense, was for hunting, gathering, preparing for the next winter. Autumn was for final preparations, for taking stock and hoping you'd gathered enough to survive the darkness. Children learned by watching, Alexei explains. A boy would follow his father on hunts from age 6, 7. At first just watching, learning to read tracks in snow, learning which ice was safe to cross. By 10, 11, he could set traps, process animals. By 15, he could survive alone if necessary. Girls learned from mothers how to sew, how to preserve food, how to manage household. Not because of stupid ideas about what girls and boys should do, but because these were the skills everyone needed to know. You ask about childhood in those conditions, and Alexei's expression softens. We played, same as children everywhere. We made toys from bones and wood. We raced reindeer. We told stories, so many stories. In winter, when darkness is long and there's little work to do outside, stories were everything. Tales of heroes, spirits, tricksters. Entertainment, yes, but also teaching. Stories about children who wandered from home and froze taught real lessons about real dangers. There's a Saka legend Alexei shares about Chiskin, the spirit of cold. Chiskin is depicted as a bull made of ice with frozen breath that can kill. In stories, he kidnaps children who disrespect the cold or wander too far from home. It's mythology, but it's also a teaching tool. Respect the cold, stay close to safety, understand that nature here is not benign. Did you ever see children with frozen tears? You ask, thinking of the image that's haunted you since you arrived. Alexei nods slowly. Many times. My own children, my grandchildren. A child falls, gets frightened, cries. The tears freeze before they fall. You pick up the child, bring them inside, and the tears melt into real crying. He pauses, searching for words. It's a reminder. The cold doesn't care about feelings, about fear, about pain. It just freezes. And we must be smarter than the cold. Historians still argue about how the Saka people survived here for so long when other groups didn't. Some credit their horse culture, the mobility and resources that horses provided. Others point to their adoption of reindeer herding from northern neighbors, combining southern and northern survival strategies. Still others suggest it's cultural, a worldview that treated survival as community responsibility rather than individual achievement. Alexei offers a simpler explanation. We survived because we had no choice. You cannot negotiate with winter. You cannot convince -70 degrees to be warmer. You adapt or you die. So we adapted. He shows you one final artifact, a traditional fire-starting kit made from flint, steel, and char cloth. Before matches, before lighters, this is how we made fire. And fire was life. No fire meant freezing to death. So every person, man, woman, child, knew how to make fire. You practiced until you could do it with numb fingers, in darkness, in wind. Because someday your life would depend on it. As you prepare to leave, Alexei grasps your hand again and looks at you with eyes that have seen 7 decades of extreme cold. You ask about children with frozen tears. I tell you, those children grow up strong. They grow up knowing that life is precious because it can end so quickly. They grow up understanding that comfort is earned, not given. They grow up with skills and knowledge that soft people will never have. He pauses, then adds, "But I also tell you, I'm glad my grandchildren have heated homes and modern clothes. I'm glad they don't have to live the way I did as a child. Tradition is good, knowledge is good, but suffering for the sake of suffering. That's not noble. That's just suffering." Walking back to Nikolai's house, the sun making its brief appearance on the horizon, you think about the layers of human adaptation you've witnessed. The traditional knowledge that sustained people for centuries. The Soviet-era disruption and forced settlement. The modern accommodations, internet, heated homes, snowmobiles, that make life here possible for more people. And underneath it all, the constant. The cold, indifferent, and eternal. That evening, Victor asks if you want to see something cool, and he means it ironically, gesturing at the window and the frozen world beyond. He leads you outside with Nikolai's permission, carrying a thermos of boiling water. You've seen this trick before, but Victor has his own version. He pours the water into a metal cup, waits exactly 30 seconds, then throws it into the air while filming with his phone. The water explodes into a cloud of ice crystals that catch the light from the house windows, creating a momentary galaxy of glittering particles. Victor reviews the video, grins, and shows you. "I'll post this," he says. "People in other places think it's magic. They don't understand it's just physics. Just physics. Just minus 65 degrees Celsius air meeting boiling water and achieving instant equilibrium. Just the reality of life in a place where water vapor doesn't exist in its vapor state for more than a fraction of a second. Just another day in Oymyakon, where even tears don't fall, they freeze. Later, much later, lying in bed again under the weight of blankets, you hear the house settling, the cold squeezing it, and you think about Alexei's words. Children who grow up strong. Children who understand that life is precious. Children who carry knowledge that spans generations. Children whose tears freeze on their cheeks, teaching them early that this world demands respect, adaptation, and an almost stubborn refusal to be defeated by conditions that would kill softer humans in hours. Tomorrow, you'll learn what happens when things go wrong in this environment. Tonight, you're just grateful for the wood stove, the walls, and the borrowed warmth that keeps the killing cold at bay. You wake to shouting, not panic screaming, but the urgent, controlled shouting of people dealing with an emergency. It's 4 a.m., still pitch dark, and the temperature has dropped to minus 69 degrees Celsius, minus 92 degrees Fahrenheit. You stumble out of bed, disoriented, and find Nikolai already dressed, pulling on his heaviest gear. "Truck broke down on the road from Tomtor," he says tersely. "2 men inside. We go help." This is what community means in Oymyakon. When someone's in trouble, you respond. There's number 911. No emergency services that can arrive in minutes. There's only neighbors, and the shared understanding that today it's them, tomorrow it might be you. You dress as quickly as possible, layering with hands that are clumsy from sleep and adrenaline. Yana is already making thermoses of hot tea, filling them with water that's almost too hot to drink because it'll cool rapidly even in insulated containers. She packs dried fish, chocolate, high-calorie foods. Nikolai grabs spare blankets, a tow rope, extra fuel, and a toolkit. The rescue vehicle is a modified truck with enormous tires and a heated cab. Mikhail has already arrived. He's part of the informal emergency response network. Another man, Dmitry, not Victor, different Dmitry, you'll learn dozens of men here share maybe 5 names, is checking equipment. Everyone moves with practiced efficiency. This isn't their first cold weather rescue. The drive to the stranded truck takes 40 minutes because the road is treacherous and rushing means risking another breakdown. Nikolai explains that the 2 men called on a satellite phone. Regular cell service doesn't exist out here, and reported that their truck's engine died. They got it running again briefly, but it died a second time. That was 90 minutes ago. 90 minutes at minus 69 degrees Celsius inside a vehicle with no heat. When you arrive, the stranded truck is sitting dark about 15 kilometers from Oymyakon. Nikolai pulls up alongside and everyone moves fast. The 2 men inside are in bad shape but alive. They've been running the engine in short bursts to get brief warmth, then shutting it off to conserve fuel, but the engine is now refusing to start at all. Both men are shivering violently, Not a good sign at this stage, but better than not shivering, which would indicate advanced hypothermia. Mikhail and Dmitri work on the engine while Nikolai gets the men into the heated rescue truck. You help, though mostly you're just trying not to be in the way. The stranded men's movements are slow, clumsy. Fine motor control goes first when you're hypothermic. Their speech is slurred. One of them, Ivan, keeps insisting he's fine, which is classic hypothermia behavior. Victims often don't recognize their own deterioration. Yana's thermoses come out. Hot tea is pressed into shaking hands. The men drink slowly because gulping hot liquid when you're severely cold can cause cardiac issues. Another piece of survival knowledge that sounds absurd until you need it. Their skin is waxy white in patches. Frostbite on cheeks, nose, fingertips. First degree, maybe second. They'll recover, probably without permanent damage, but it was close. The engine problem is a frozen fuel line. At these temperatures, diesel fuel can gel, becoming too thick to flow properly. The truck should have been using winterized diesel with additives to prevent gelling, but either the fuel was old, improperly treated, or the temperature just overwhelmed the additive's effectiveness. Mikhail and Dmitri are using a portable heater, essentially a kerosene blowtorch, to warm the fuel system. It's dangerous work. Too much heat and you risk fire. Too little and the fuel stays frozen. While they work, Nikolai explains the calculations these men faced. When your vehicle dies in these conditions, you have a decision tree with no good options. Stay with the vehicle, you have shelter but limited time before you freeze. Walk for help, you might make it or you might die before reaching safety. Try to repair the vehicle, you might succeed or you might waste precious time and body heat. These men made the right call. Stayed with the truck, conserved fuel, called for help, waited. But right call is relative. If help hadn't come, if the satellite phone had failed, if any of a dozen variables had shifted, they'd be dead. After 30 minutes of work, the engine coughs, sputters, catches. Mikhail revs it carefully, keeping it running while the fuel system warms. The plan is to have one of the rescue team drive the damaged truck back to Oymyakon, while the owners ride in the heated cab of the rescue vehicle. Nobody drives alone in these conditions if it can be avoided. Back in Oymyakon, Ivan and his companion, Sergei, are taken to Nikolai's house where Yana begins the careful process of warming them up. Not too fast because rapid rewarming can cause damage. They sit by the stove, drink more tea, eat some food. Their frostbitten areas are left alone for now. You don't rub frostbite, you don't apply direct heat. You just let the body warm gradually and hope the tissue survives. By 8 a.m., both men are stable, talking more clearly, embarrassed by the trouble they've caused. They explain they were hauling supplies from Yakutsk and thought they could make it through without stopping overnight in Tomtor. Bad decision, and they know it. But these are the kinds of judgment errors that happen: overconfidence, schedule pressure, fatigue, and in temperate climates they'd mean a roadside wait for a tow truck. Here they mean potential death. Sergei keeps flexing his fingers, watching them move, clearly worried about whether the frostbite will cause permanent damage. Yana reassures him. The tissue looks viable, not the black of deep frostbite. He'll probably keep all his fingers. Probably. They'll know more in a few days. The rescue has taken 5 hours, and everyone involved will now sleep for a few hours before returning to their normal routines. This is the reality of living here. Emergencies don't happen on convenient schedules, and everyone chips in because there's no alternative infrastructure. Later that day, after you've slept and eaten, Nikolai takes you to see the village's emergency shelter. It's a small heated building maintained collectively, stocked with food, water, blankets, medical supplies, and communication equipment. It exists because everyone understands that disasters happen. Blizzards, vehicle breakdowns, injuries, and having a central resource can save lives. The medical supplies are basic: bandages, pain relievers, antibiotics, equipment for treating frostbite and hypothermia. Serious medical emergencies require evacuation to Yakutsk, which in winter means either a very dangerous drive or a helicopter if weather permits and one is available. Neither option is quick. A heart attack, a serious injury, a difficult childbirth, these are all potential death sentences here simply because advanced medical care is 20 hours away on a good day, completely inaccessible on a bad one. Nikolai mentions a story from 5 years ago. A woman went into labor prematurely, complications developed, and the weather was too severe for a helicopter. The village's nurse, trained in basic emergency obstetrics but not equipped for serious complications, did what she could. Mother and baby both survived, barely, but it was luck as much as skill. The woman moved to Yakutsk the following year. She never came back. We lose people that way, Nikolai says quietly. Not to the cold directly, but to fear of the cold. A bad experience, a close call, and they decide it's not worth it. I don't blame them. You ask about other close calls, and he's reluctant at first, but eventually he shares. A hunter who fell through river ice and got out but was soaked in minus 55 degrees Celsius air. He made it home, barely, and lost 8 toes and 3 fingers to frostbite. A child who wandered away from school during a momentary lapse in supervision and was missing for 10 minutes in minus 62 degrees Celsius conditions. They found her hiding behind a building, confused and crying, with severe frostbite on her face. A fuel delivery driver whose truck caught fire, a rare event, but when it happened, he had to choose between burning and freezing. He got far enough away to avoid the fire and close enough to keep warm. That particular tightrope walk gave him second-degree burns on one side and frostbite on the other. Every long-term resident here has stories. Near misses, actual disasters, moments when the margin between survival and death was measured in minutes or meters. It creates a particular kind of awareness, not paranoia exactly, but a constant background calculation of risk. Children grow up with this awareness embedded. Victor mentions casually that he always tells someone where he's going and when he'll be back, even for short trips. It's not parental control, it's survival protocol. If you don't return when expected, people start looking. That system has saved lives. The school has its own emergency procedures. If temperature drops unexpectedly during the school day, parents are notified immediately. If it drops below minus 55 degrees Celsius, school is dismissed and teachers walk children home. No child travels alone in extreme cold. The school maintains emergency supplies to shelter everyone overnight if necessary. It's never happened, but the supplies are there, checked regularly because never happened yet and will never happen are very different statements. That evening, you join Nikolai for a community meeting at the village hall. About 30 people attend, a significant portion of Oymykon's population. The agenda includes discussing the fuel supply situation. The last delivery was delayed by weather, organizing a collective hunting expedition for spring, and reviewing emergency response protocols. The conversation about emergency protocols is revealing. They discuss response times, equipment maintenance, communication systems. Someone suggests creating a formal training program for younger adults, passing on knowledge systematically rather than assuming it'll be absorbed through experience. The older generation resists slightly, arguing that experience is the best teacher, but the younger voices push back. What if we need this knowledge and don't have time to learn through experience? What if someone needs help and we don't know what to do? It's resolved with typical Russian practicality. They'll do both. Maintain the traditional knowledge transfer and add formal training sessions. Alexei is volunteered to teach traditional survival skills. A former military medic will teach emergency medical response. Someone with satellite phone experience will teach communication protocols. After the meeting, walking back through the dark, it's only 6 p.m. but night came hours ago. Nikolai talks about community bonds forged through shared vulnerability. In warm places, he says, people can afford to be strangers. Here, every person matters because you might need them someday. That creates closeness, yes, but also pressure. Small communities, everyone knows everything about everyone. It's comforting and claustrophobic in equal measure. You ask if people ever just snap from the pressure, the cold, the darkness, the isolation. He's quiet for a moment, then nods. Depression is a problem, especially in winter. Drinking is a problem. Some people just give up. Not suicide exactly, though that happens too. More like they stop fighting. They become careless, take risks, and eventually the cold takes them. We call it making peace with winter, but it's really giving up. Back at the house, you find Victor playing video games online with friends in other parts of Russia. His avatar is running through a tropical landscape, and the contrast is almost painful. He notices you watching and grins sheepishly. It's weird, right? I'm sitting here where it's -67 outside, playing a game where I'm on a beach. But it's nice to pretend sometimes. Katia is drawing at the kitchen table, a picture of a house with smoke coming from the chimney, people standing outside in the sun. It's nearly identical to the drawing Kolya gave you days ago. This must be a universal image for children here. Home, warmth, light. The things that keep you alive. Yana calls everyone for dinner, and you sit around the table eating reheated stew and fresh bread. The conversation is mundane. Victor's schoolwork, Katia's friend drama, Nikolai's plans to repair the snowmobile. Normal family dinner conversation, except it's happening in one of the most extreme environments on Earth. After the children are in bed, you ask Yana the question that's been building since this morning's rescue. How do you live with the constant fear, the knowledge that a simple mistake, a mechanical failure, bad luck, any of it could kill someone you love? She considers this, hands wrapped around her teacup. You don't live with fear. You live with respect. Fear paralyzes. Respect makes you careful. We respect the cold the way you might respect a dangerous animal. We don't fear it every moment, but we never forget it's there. And when something goes wrong? When something goes wrong, we respond. We help. We do what we can. And if that's not enough, she pauses, choosing words carefully. Then we grieve and continue. What else can we do? Stop living because life is dangerous? That's not life. That night, trying to sleep, you keep thinking about Ivan and Sergei in that dead truck. 90 minutes in -69 degrees Celsius air. Making the right choices but still balanced on the edge of disaster. You think about the mother in labor 5 years ago, survival measured in luck and a nurse's desperate competence. You think about the child who wandered from school for 10 minutes and nearly lost her face to frostbite. The margin for error here isn't just small. It's nearly non-existent. And yet people persist, build lives, raise children, plan for futures. Just before you finally drift off, you hear Katia cough again from the other room. That same soft, sick child cough. And you hear Yana's footsteps, the murmur of comfort, the sound of care that transcends environment. Even in a place where a broken-down truck can kill you in hours, where tears freeze before they fall, where winter is a months-long siege against human survival. Even here, parents comfort sick children in the night. Some things the cold can never touch. The next morning brings something you haven't experienced yet in Yakutia. Relative warmth. The temperature has risen to -42 degrees Celsius, -44 degrees Fahrenheit, and the change is palpable. Nikolai laughs at your expression when he tells you the temperature. I know, he says. You think -42 is warm now. You've been here too long already. He's right. Your frame of reference has shifted. -42 degrees Celsius feels almost balmy compared to the -65 degrees Celsius to -69 degrees Celsius you've been experiencing. It's still cold enough to kill you in minutes without proper clothing, but the air doesn't have that same razor-edge quality. You can breathe more easily. Metal doesn't shatter quite as readily. The world feels marginally less hostile. This temperature shift allows for something special. Nikolai is taking you to see the ice houses. These aren't the stilted homes you've been staying in, but traditional structures built entirely from ice blocks, similar to igloos but constructed with socket techniques passed down through generations. They're not permanent residences, nobody lives in them, but they're maintained as cultural heritage and occasional emergency shelters. The ice house sits about 2 kilometers from the village center, and you make the journey on snowmobile, with you clinging to Nikolai's back like a nervous koala. The landscape under this warmer temperature looks slightly different. The ice fog is less dense, and you can actually see further than 100 meters. The sun, still weak and low on the horizon, provides enough light to give the snow a bluish tint rather than the flat gray it's had for days. The ice house itself is extraordinary. It's dome-shaped, maybe 4 meters in diameter, built from blocks of clear river ice cut and fitted together with remarkable precision. Light filters through the walls, creating a dim blue-green glow inside. The temperature inside is actually warmer than outside, maybe -30 degrees Celsius, because ice is an excellent insulator and the structure holds whatever heat is generated within. Nikolai explains that these structures were traditionally built for hunters on extended trips. You'd build the ice house, create a small fire inside for warmth and cooking, and the ice walls would actually stabilize the interior temperature. The fire couldn't be too large or you'd melt your shelter, but a careful, controlled fire could keep the interior survivable. My grandfather told me stories, Nikolai says, his breath creating small clouds in the dim interior. Hunters would spend weeks out here, living in ice houses, tracking sable and fox. They'd return with enough furs to trade for everything the family needed. But it was hard, lonely work. Men would go crazy from isolation sometimes. Just them and the ice and the darkness. You ask if anyone still hunts that way, and he shakes his head. Not for weeks at a time, no. Now we have snowmobiles, satellite phones, GPS. We can go out for a day or two, come back. The old way, living in ice, checking trap lines on foot or with reindeer, weeks alone, that's mostly gone. Some people miss it. Most are glad it's over. Inside the ice house, sitting on reindeer hides that Nikolai brought, you experience a strange kind of quiet. The ice walls muffle sound, creating a peculiar acoustic environment where your own breathing seems loud. Outside sounds, wind, snowmobile engines, anything, are dampened to near silence. It's peaceful in an eerie way, like being inside a frozen womb. Nikolai lights a small portable stove, and you share tea and dried fish. He talks about the relationship between the Saka people and their environment. Not conquest, not domination, but negotiation. We don't fight winter, he explains. You can't fight winter and win. You work with it. You take what it gives. Frozen rivers for travel, cold that preserves food, furs from animals that thrive here. And you accept what it takes. What winter takes, you've learned, is substantial. Life expectancy in Yakutia is lower than in warmer parts of Russia. Respiratory diseases are common. Cardiovascular stress from constant cold takes a toll. Accidents that would be minor elsewhere become major here. A simple fall that breaks a leg in Moscow is an inconvenience. The same fall here, far from medical care in extreme cold, can be a death sentence. But there are unexpected benefits too. The constant cold means certain diseases don't thrive. Mosquitoes and other insects, which plague Siberia in summer, are completely absent in winter. Food preservation is effortless. The world is a freezer. Crime rates are low, partly because small communities have strong social bonds and partly because, well, who's going to run away after robbing someone when it's minus 60 degrees Celsius outside? After an hour in the ice house, you emerge back into the warm minus 42 degrees Celsius air. The contrast is shocking. The outside now feels almost hot after the minus 30 degrees Celsius interior. Your body's temperature perception has completely recalibrated. You're becoming, in a small way, adapted to this environment. The snowmobile ride back is exhilarating in the relatively warm conditions. Nikolai opens up the throttle a bit, and you zip across the snow-packed landscape, the wind sharp against your face but not immediately painful. You pass a small herd of Saka horses, standing stoically in a cluster, snow caked on their thick winter coats. They barely glance at you. They were born for this. Back at the house, Yana has news. The village is organizing a small winter festival for tomorrow. It's an annual tradition, a midwinter celebration designed to break up the monotony of the dark months, bring the community together, and remind everyone why they choose to stay. That evening, preparations begin. Victor and some other teenagers are building an ice sculpture in the village center. A traditional Saka komis, jaw harp, carved from a massive block of river ice. Katia and her friends are making decorations from colored paper and fabric. The adults are organizing food. There will be a communal meal, traditional dishes, and the precious luxury of fresh-baked treats. The next day, festival day, the temperature holds at a manageable minus 45 degrees Celsius, which everyone agrees is perfect festival weather. You help set up tables in the village hall, which has been heated to almost uncomfortable warmth. The food arrives in waves. Platters of stroganina, smoked fish, venison roasted with wild herbs, fresh bread, pastries filled with berry preserves made last summer. The festival itself is a revelation of how community sustains itself in extreme isolation. There are no professional entertainers, no outside acts. Everything is local. Alexei plays traditional Saka music on a komis, the jaw harp producing haunting, resonant tones. A group of women perform traditional dances, their movements telling stories of horses, hunting, seasons, survival. Children perform a play they've been rehearsing at school, a humorous retelling of a traditional tale about a lazy hunter who learns to respect winter. Kolya's age-mate from Tomtor is in it, wearing a costume made from felt and fur, and the kids are clearly having a blast. The adults laugh and applaud, and for these moments, the isolation and cold feel distant. Victor and his friends perform music too, but there's his modern Russian pop played on guitars and a keyboard, songs about love and summer and freedom. The contrast with Alexei's traditional music is stark, and you can see the older generation's mixed feelings. Pride in the kids' talent, worry about cultural loss, understanding that change is inevitable. Katia performs a dance with other young girls, and she's clearly nervous, stumbling slightly over the steps. But everyone applauds enthusiastically because this is about community, not perfection. After she finishes, she runs to Yana, beaming, and you capture the moment mentally. A 7-year-old girl, happy and loved, in the coldest inhabited place on Earth. The communal meal is noisy and warm and surprisingly joyful. People who've been isolated in their individual homes for weeks come together, share food, trade stories, laugh about shared struggles. Someone tells the story of the festival 3 years ago when it was minus 71 degrees Celsius and they still held it, but everyone had to eat quickly because the food was freezing on their plates. Someone else shares a story about the time the village hall's heater broke mid-festival and they all had to finish eating in their coats. These stories of hardship are told with humor, transformed into legends that bind the community together. Remember when becomes a way of saying, we survived this together, we can survive the next challenge too. Nikolai introduces you to dozens of people, and you begin to understand the web of relationships that makes this place function. This person is related to that person who married someone else's cousin whose grandfather taught Alexei traditional crafts. Everyone has multiple roles. Victor's math teacher is also the village's backup generator mechanic. The woman who runs the store is also a midwife. Specialization is a luxury of large populations. Here, everyone does multiple jobs. You meet a woman named Olga, different from the first night Olga. Remember, there are maybe 5 names for women too, who runs a small informal school teaching traditional crafts. She shows you mittens made from rabbit fur lined with wool, so warm and lightweight they seem almost magical. She explains that synthetic materials can keep you warm, yes, but natural materials breathe, wick moisture, and last for decades if cared for properly. This knowledge, she says seriously, it must continue. Young people want modern, want synthetic, want what they see on internet. I don't blame them. Synthetic is easier, lighter, cheaper sometimes. But when synthetic fails, when zipper breaks or fabric tears or battery dies, traditional materials still work. This is knowledge that saved our ancestors. We throw it away at our peril. The festival continues into the evening, which here means into the darkness because evening starts around 3 p.m. Outside, someone has lit torches, actual flaming torches, creating islands of flickering light in the black. The ice sculpture of the komis catches and reflects the firelight, creating dancing patterns. Children run around despite the cold, burning off energy and excitement. You notice Sergei, one of the men from the truck breakdown, talking with Ivan. Both have bandages on their frostbitten fingers, but they're here, participating, part of this community. That's the unspoken message of the festival. We're all in this together. We all need each other. Last week's emergency victims are today's festival attendees and tomorrow's potential rescuers. As the festival winds down, people begin drifting home. Families bundle children who've grown tired and cranky. Couples walk together through the torchlit darkness. Groups of teenagers linger, reluctant to end the social time. You help clean up, stacking chairs, sweeping floors, washing dishes in the village hall's kitchen. Yana and Nikolai work alongside you, and you're struck by how normal this feels. It's just people cleaning up after a community event, the same scene that plays out in church halls and community centers and school gymnasiums everywhere. The extreme environment fades into background, and you're left with the essential human activity. Coming together, sharing food and stories, then cleaning up and going home. Walking back to Nikolai's house, the temperature has dropped again. It's minus 52 degrees Celsius now, and the brief respite is over. Winter is reasserting itself. Your body, briefly fooled by the warmth of minus 42 degrees Celsius, is reminded that this place is fundamentally hostile. But you've also seen something important: community as survival technology. The festival wasn't frivolous entertainment. It was social infrastructure, a deliberate effort to maintain connections that keep people alive, literally and psychologically. The food was shared resources. The stories were transferred knowledge. The music and dance were cultural memory, passing traditions from generation to generation. The simple act of gathering was a reminder that no one survives here alone. That night, lying in bed once more, you hear the now familiar sounds. The stove crackling, the house settling, the absolute silence of the frozen world outside. But you also hear, faintly, Victor practicing guitar in his room. And you hear Katia giggling at something Yana said. And you hear Nikolai's heavy footsteps as he does a final check of the stove before bed. You hear life persisting in spite of everything. You hear community holding back the dark and the cold through the simple act of being together. And you understand, finally, why people stay. Your final full day in Oymyakon arrives with mixed feelings. Part of you is desperate to leave, to escape the relentless cold, the darkness, the constant awareness of danger. But another part of you has become attached to this place and its people in ways you didn't expect. You've lived, however briefly, inside an experience that most of humanity will never understand. The temperature this morning is minus 61 degrees Celsius, minus 78 degrees Fahrenheit, back to what you've learned to think of as normal Oymyakon cold. Nikolai has one more thing he wants to show you before you leave. The monument that marks Oymyakon as the coldest inhabited place on Earth. It's a simple obelisk in the village center, inscribed with the record low temperature of minus 67.7 degrees Celsius from 1933, though locals will swear to you that it's been colder since then, just not officially recorded. Standing there, bundled against the cold, you think about what that number means. Minus 67.7 degrees Celsius is minus 89.9 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, human skin freezes in under 2 minutes. Unprotected exposure for 10 minutes is likely fatal. This is cold that exists outside most people's frame of reference, cold that seems almost theoretical until you experience even a fraction of it. Tourists sometimes visit Oymyakon in winter. Not many, because getting here is difficult and expensive, but some come seeking the extremity, the bragging rights, the Instagram posts. They stay a few days, take photos at the monument, throw boiling water in the air, and leave. You understand the impulse, but you also understand now that they're missing the real story. The real story isn't the temperature. It's the people who live here when the tourists leave. Back at Nikolai's house, you find Yana teaching Katia how to sew a traditional fur hat. Katia's stitches are large and uneven, but Yana is patient, showing her again how to hold the needle, how to keep the stitches tight to prevent air infiltration. This is more than a craft lesson. It's survival knowledge being passed from mother to daughter, a chain of learning that stretches back generations. When I was Katia's age, Yana says, my grandmother taught me. She was very strict. She would make me redo stitches until they were perfect. I hated it then. I wanted to play, but now I understand. She was giving me tools to survive. You ask Katia if she likes sewing, and she shrugs with perfect 7-year-old ambivalence. It's okay. I like drawing better. But Mama says I need to know this. She pauses, concentrating on a stitch, then adds, my friend Lena doesn't know how to sew. Her mama buys everything from the store. But Mama says store things can break. It's a microcosm of the tension playing out across Oymyakon and communities like it. The older generation insists on traditional knowledge while the younger generation grows up with access to global culture through the internet. Katia can watch YouTube videos of children in California, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, children who've never seen snow, who wear shorts in winter, whose biggest concern might be what game to play at recess. The cognitive dissonance of growing up here while being connected to everywhere else must be profound. Victor is more articulate about it when you talk with him later. I love my home, he says carefully. But I also know it's weird. My online friends think it's cool that I live here, but they don't understand what it means. They see it as an adventure. I see it as, he struggles for the word. As normal but also limiting. I can't just decide to go to a movie theater. I can't join a sports team that competes against other schools because there are no other schools close enough. My choices are limited by geography and temperature. Do you want to leave? You ask. I want to have the option to leave, he says, which is a diplomatic answer but probably honest. I want to go to university, see other places, experience life that isn't shaped by cold. But I also want to be able to come back if I choose. I don't want to become one of those people who leaves and forgets where they came from. It's a mature perspective for a 12-year-old, but growing up in extreme conditions seems to accelerate certain kinds of maturity. Victor has had to make life and death decisions about clothing and exposure that kids in temperate climates never face. He's watched adults perform emergency rescues. He's seen what happens when people underestimate the cold. These experiences shape perspective in ways that comfort never can. That afternoon, Alexei visits to say goodbye. He brings a gift, a small knife in a handmade sheath, the kind used for processing fish and game. For you to remember, he says through Nikolai's translation, and to remember that tools matter. Knowledge matters. This knife, my grandfather made it, my father carried it, I used it for 60 years. It will last another 100 if cared for. Modern things break. Old ways persist. You're touched by the gift and slightly overwhelmed by the gesture. This isn't tourist trinket. It's a functional tool, worn smooth from decades of use. Alexei waves off your attempts to refuse it. I have others, and you need to understand something. He pauses, gathering thoughts, then continues. You came here to see how we survive the cold. You saw the temperature, the ice, the buildings. But the real survival is here. He taps his head. And here, he taps his chest. We survive because we remember. We remember what worked, what failed, who helped, who didn't. We pass this memory to children. This is how humans survive impossible places. Before he leaves, Alexei asks you a question. What will you tell people about Oymyakon? About us? You think carefully before answering. I'll tell them about the cold, because that's what they'll want to hear. But I'll also tell them about the people. About families raising children in places that seem impossible. About communities that function through mutual dependence. About knowledge passed through generations. About choosing to stay in a place that constantly challenges survival. Alexei nods slowly. Good. Tell them we are not crazy. Tell them we are not suffering. Tell them we are living the way our ancestors lived, in the place they chose, maintaining traditions that matter. Tell them the cold is real. Yes, but so is the warmth. He gestures around Nikolai's home, indicating family, community, connection. That evening, your last evening, Yana prepares a special dinner. It's not elaborate. Venison, potatoes, preserved vegetables. But it's made with care, and everyone understands it's a farewell meal. The conversation is lighter than usual, deliberately avoiding the sadness of parting. Victor tells jokes he learned online. Katia shows off her finished hat, which is actually quite good despite her earlier struggles. Nikolai talks about plans for the spring hunting season. After dinner, while Yana is putting Katia to bed, Nikolai brings out a bottle of vodka, real vodka, not the cheap stuff. In Russia, he says, we toast to departures. We toast to safe travels. We toast to friendship. You share drinks, the vodka burning in a way that feels appropriate for a place defined by cold. You asked me earlier in the week why we stay. Nikolai says, slightly tipsy now, more open than usual. I gave you answers about tradition, about knowledge, about not being defeated. All true, but there's something else. He pauses, looking for words. When you live in a place like this, when you survive things that would kill softer people, when you raise children despite everything, there's a kind of pride in that. Not arrogant pride. More like proof. Proof that humans can adapt, can persist, can build lives anywhere. We are proof. He's right, you realize. Oymyakon and places like it are laboratories of human resilience. They prove that our species, despite being tropical apes designed for savanna temperatures, can through knowledge, community, and stubbornness, survive almost anywhere. Victor joins the conversation, having put away his guitar. I think about leaving all the time, he admits. But I also think about what I'd lose. Not just family, though that's huge. But I'd lose being someone who survived this. When I meet people from warm places, I have something they don't. I know I can handle real hardship. That's worth something. Do you think Katia will stay when she grows up? You ask Yana, who's returned from putting Katia to bed. I hope she has the choice, Yana says. I hope the world doesn't change so much that places like this become impossible to live in. Climate change, economic shifts, population movements, all these could end communities like ours. Not through cold, ironically, but through everything else. If young people all leave, if supply chains fail, if fuel becomes too expensive, if... She stops, shaking her head. I don't know. I hope she has the choice. It's a sobering thought. Oymyakon has survived for generations in the face of extreme cold, but it might not survive the modern world's indifference. Small, remote communities everywhere are struggling with depopulation, economic marginalization, cultural erosion. The cold that makes Oymyakon special is also what makes it vulnerable. Later, you step outside one final time. The temperature is minus 63 degrees Celsius. The sky is clear and dense with stars, and the silence is complete. You stand there, feeling the cold work its way through your layers, feeling your breath freeze and fall as ice crystals, feeling the absolute vastness of the frozen landscape around you. And you think about the children here. Victor with his guitar and his global internet connections and his pride in surviving. Katia with her drawings of sunny days and her sewing lessons and her frozen tears. Kolya in Tomtor, too young to understand but already learning. All the children in this valley, growing up in conditions that would horrify child safety advocates in temperate climates, but also growing up strong, capable, aware of their own resilience. You think about parents holding children whose tears freeze on their cheeks, and you understand it differently now. It's not just a striking image. It's a metaphor for parenthood in extreme conditions, the impossibility of completely protecting children from the environment, the pain of watching them struggle, the determination to give them tools to survive, the hope that they'll grow strong rather than broken. Inside, warmth and light. The family is still up, not wanting to end this last evening. You join them, shedding the heavy outer layers once more, accepting another cup of tea from Yana, listening to Nikolai tell a story about his father, watching Victor scroll his phone while simultaneously paying attention to the conversation. This is what you'll remember, you realize. Not just the cold, though that's unforgettable, but this family around a table, warmth against the dark, human connection as the ultimate survival technology. Tomorrow you'll begin the long journey back. First to Yakutsk, then Moscow, then home to whatever comfortable, temperate place you came from. You'll carry Alexei's knife, Kolya's drawing, memories of frozen tears and ice fog and temperatures that sound fictional. But more than that, you'll carry the knowledge that in the coldest inhabited place on Earth, life persists. Children grow, families endure, communities survive through mutual care and pass down knowledge. You'll carry proof that humans are more resilient than we often believe, more capable of adaptation, more able to find warmth even in the most frozen places. Not warmth from heaters or stoves, though those matter. Warmth from each other. That night, your last night, you sleep deeply, dreaming of ice and stars and children bundled against the cold, walking to school through temperatures that would kill most of the world's population, but who arrived safely because someone taught them how, because someone cared enough to pass on knowledge, because community held them close even as the cold tried to take them. Tomorrow you leave. Tonight you belong to Oymyakon. The morning of your departure arrives with temperatures that feel almost apologetic. Only minus 58 degrees Celsius, minus 72 degrees Fahrenheit, as if Oymyakon is offering a gentler goodbye. You wake early, before the family, and lie quietly in bed listening to the sounds that have become familiar. The crack and pop of wood in the stove, the house settling in the cold, the distant sound of a snowmobile starting somewhere in the village. You've been here just over a week, but it feels simultaneously longer and shorter. Longer because the intensity of the experience has compressed so much learning, so many sensations, into such a brief time. Shorter because you're leaving just as you've begun to understand the rhythm of life here, the unspoken protocols, the delicate balance between individual household and collective survival. Yana insists on preparing a large breakfast, more food than you can possibly eat, but that's the point. It's a sending off, a gesture of care, a final expression of hospitality. There's hot porridge with butter and honey, fried eggs, thick slices of bread, smoked fish, and endless tea. Katia appears sleepy-eyed and climbs into her mother's lap, not quite ready to face the day. Victor is more alert, but there's something in his expression, perhaps the recognition that you represent connection to that wider world he's both drawn to and uncertain about. "You'll come back?" Katia asks suddenly, her directness catching you off guard. You want to say yes, to promise a return, but honesty feels more respectful. "I don't know," you tell her. "It's very far and very expensive to get here, but I'll remember you. I'll remember all of you." She seems to accept this, nodding solemnly. Children in places like this probably learn early that people come and go, that goodbye is often permanent. Nikolai has been checking the weather reports and road conditions since dawn. The drive back to Yakutsk will take 2 days again, with an overnight stop in Tomtor. The temperature is acceptable, no storms are forecast, but he's cautious, conditions can change rapidly and overconfidence kills. Mikhail will drive with you again, providing a second vehicle for safety. As you're loading your minimal luggage into the UAZ, neighbors emerge to say goodbye. This isn't a formal gathering, just people stepping out as they notice activity, offering handshakes and words you mostly don't understand but whose warmth transcends language. The woman who runs the store presses a package of smoked fish into your hands. "For the journey," she says through someone's translation. A man you met briefly at the festival gives you a small carved wooden figure of a reindeer. These gifts aren't valuable in monetary terms, but they're weighted with meaning. In a place where survival requires hoarding resources carefully, giving anything away is significant. These gifts say, "You were welcomed here, you're leaving as friend rather than stranger. You carry a piece of this place with you." Alexei appears, moving slowly in the cold, and clasps your hand in both of his. "Remember," he says simply, just that one word, but it encompasses everything. Remember what you've seen, remember who you've met, remember that humans can survive anything with knowledge and community. Remember that the cold shapes people but doesn't defeat them. The actual departure is harder than you expected. Yana hugs you tightly, Katia wraps around your leg for a moment, and even Victor offers an awkward but genuine handshake. Nikolai claps you on the back and says, "Safe travels, friend. You survived Oymyakon." Most people can't say that. The drive out of the village feels symbolic, leaving warmth and community for the vast frozen emptiness of the landscape. As Oymyakon disappears behind you, swallowed by ice fog and distance, you experience a strange sense of loss. You're going back to comfort, to safety, to temperatures that don't require constant vigilance. But you're also leaving something profound. The journey to Tomtor passes in relative silence. Mikhail drives steadily, occasionally pointing out landmarks you remember from the trip in, the memorial cross, the cluster of skeletal larch trees, the spot where you helped rescue Ivan and Sergei. That feels like weeks ago but was only days. Time dilates strangely in extreme conditions. At Tomtor, you stay again with Svetlana and Anatoly. Young Kolya remembers you and shyly presents another drawing, this one showing a truck on a road with 2 houses at either end. You realize he's drawn your journey, from his house to Oymyakon and back. The attention to detail is touching. He's included the stilts under the houses, smoke from chimneys, even tiny figures bundled in winter clothes. "He's been excited you were coming back through," Svetlana explains. "He told everyone at his playgroup that he has a friend who's traveling from the coldest place in the world. That night over dinner, you ask Svetlana and Anatoly about the future, what they hope for their children, what they fear. Anatoly is pragmatic. "I hope they're warm, safe, fed. I hope they learn enough to have choices. Stay here, leave for the city, whatever makes them happy. But I want them to be able to come back if they choose. I want this place to still exist for them." Do you think it will? You ask. He's quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I don't know. Climate is changing. Winters are slightly less cold than when I was young. Not warm, obviously, but less extreme. Scientists still argue whether this is temporary fluctuation or permanent change. Either way, it affects everything. Animals change migration patterns. River ice forms differently. Traditional knowledge becomes less reliable when the patterns change. Svetlana adds, and economics change too. Younger people want jobs that pay in actual money, not just subsistence. Internet shows them lives they could have elsewhere. We can't compete with that. Why stay here, in the cold and dark, when you could have warmth and opportunity somewhere else? Why do you stay? You ask, though you've asked this question in various forms all week. Because this is home, Svetlana says simply. Because leaving feels like betrayal of parents, of grandparents, of everyone who survived here before us. Because someone has to stay or this place dies completely. And because, she pauses, glancing at Kolya playing with his trucks nearby. Because I want my children to know they come from people who didn't give up when things were hard. The next morning, you continue toward Yakutsk. The landscape gradually changes as you descend from the higher elevations of Oymykon's valley. The temperature, reading from the dashboard, climbs, if you can use that word, from minus 56 degrees Celsius to minus 49 degrees Celsius to minus 43 degrees Celsius. Each degree feels significant now. Your body has calibrated to these extremes. Yakutsk, when you finally reach it, feels almost tropical at minus 38 degrees Celsius. The ice fog is thinner. Buildings seem less huddled against the cold. People move more freely, less bundled. You realize this is still colder than Antarctica's average temperature, still cold enough to cause frostbite in minutes, still lethal to the unprepared, but compared to Oymyakon, it feels almost comfortable. You spend one final night in Yakutsk before your flight out. The hotel has heating that works almost too well, and you find yourself sweating, unable to adjust immediately to the warmth. You open a window slightly, letting in the minus 38 degrees Celsius air, and fall asleep to the familiar sound of ice fog and distant engines. The flight to Moscow the next day is surreal. 6 hours traversing time zones, each one taking you further from the extreme cold. You cross from deep winter into regions where winter means snow and freezing temperatures, but nothing like Yakutia's assault. By the time you land in Moscow, where it's a balmy minus 8 degrees Celsius, you feel disoriented. People in the Moscow airport are wearing winter coats and complaining about the cold. You, still calibrated to Yakutian temperatures, find the terminal almost uncomfortably warm. Someone bumps into you and apologizes, and you're struck by the density of humanity here. Thousands of people in one building, more people than live in several Yakutian villages combined. You have a long layover, and you spend it in a coffee shop watching people and processing what you've experienced. Families traveling for business or pleasure, completely unaware that a few thousand kilometers to the east, children are walking to school in temperatures that would kill these travelers in minutes. The disconnect is profound. You think about Victor, probably sleeping now given the time difference, dreaming of guitars and university and a life beyond the cold. You think about Katya, practicing her sewing stitches, learning survival skills disguised as crafts. You think about Kolya and his frozen tears, about Alexei and his insistence on memory, about Nikolai and Yana and their quiet determination to continue traditions in the face of everything. You think about the paradox of Oymyakon and places like it, how they exist simultaneously as proof of human resilience and as anachronisms in the modern world. How they're both timeless and threatened, both sustainable through traditional knowledge and vulnerable to economic and climatic change. The question that haunts you is, will places like Oymyakon still exist in 50 years? Will Katya's children walk to school through minus 60 degrees Celsius cold, maintaining traditions that stretch back generations? Or will economic reality, climate change, and the gravitational pull of modern life finally succeed where extreme cold has failed, drawing the population away until these villages become ghost towns, preserved only in photographs and memories? Historians still argue whether small, extreme environment communities are sustainable in the globalized modern world, or whether they represent a dying way of life. The optimists point to human stubbornness, cultural resilience, and the adaptability that allowed humans to inhabit every continent. The pessimists cite depopulation statistics, economic pressures, and the simple fact that maintaining infrastructure in such conditions becomes exponentially harder as populations shrink. You don't have answers. You're not sure anyone does. What you have are memories. Ice fog transforming sunlight into rainbow crystals. The sound of boiling water exploding into ice midair. The sight of children bundled until they're nearly spherical, walking to school through cold that defies comprehension. The warmth of tea and hospitality in homes where stepping outside means immediate danger. The solidarity of a community that understands survival is collective, not individual. And you have an image burned into your consciousness. A crying child, tears frozen on their cheeks before they can fall, held by a parent who cannot completely protect them from the cold but who tries anyway, who teaches them to survive, who gives them tools and knowledge and love, who prepares them for a world that is often harsh but also, sometimes, beautiful. Your flight home is called. You gather your things, including Alexei's knife, Kolya's drawings, the small carved reindeer, and head toward the gate. Within hours, you'll be back in comfortable temperatures, back to a life where cold means putting on a jacket, where survival isn't a daily calculation, where the margin for error is measured in convenience rather than minutes. But part of you realize, will always be in that frozen valley, in that village at the edge of human habitability, with those families who choose every day to stay, to persist, to raise children in conditions that seem impossible. You'll carry their story with you. You'll tell people about the coldest inhabited place on Earth, about the temperature and the darkness and the ice. But more importantly, you'll tell them about the warmth, the human warmth that exists even in the coldest places, the warmth of community and knowledge and stubborn resilience, the warmth of parents comforting children whose tears freeze on their cheeks but who cry anyway, who feel and hurt and love in a place that seems designed to freeze feeling itself. Because that's the real story of Oymyakon. Not the cold that tries to kill you, but the warmth that keeps you alive. You settle into your seat, close your eyes, and as the plane lifts off, carrying you away from Yakutia, you whisper a quiet thank you to Nikolai and Yana, to Victor and Katya, to Alexei and Mikhail and Svetlana and Anatoly and little Kolya with his frozen tears and hopeful drawings. Thank you for showing me what humans can endure. Thank you for showing me what humans can become. Thank you for proving that even at -71 degrees Celsius, even in the darkest months, even in the most hostile place humans have chosen to call home, life persists, love persists, hope persists, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to witness it, to live inside it for a brief moment, and to carry that knowledge with you for the rest of your life. The cold shaped them, yes, but it didn't defeat them, and that makes all the difference. The plane climbs higher, Moscow's lights fading below. Your breathing slows. The cabin's gentle hum surrounds you. Outside, somewhere in the vast darkness, Yakutia exists. Frozen, remote, resilient. Children sleep under heavy blankets. Parents tend with stoves. Communities endure. The world is large and filled with more varieties of human experience than any one person can comprehend. But for this brief time, you glimpsed one version, harsh, beautiful, uncompromising. Your eyes grow heavy. The knife rests in your bag, the drawings carefully stored. Evidence that you were there, that you witnessed, that you understood, even briefly, what it means to survive at the edge. Sleep comes easily now after a week of extremes. Your dreams are filled with ice crystals catching light, with children bundled against the cold, with smoke rising straight into still air, with the quiet pride of people who refuse to be defeated by temperature. And somewhere, in those dreams, a child cries, and tears freeze on small cheeks, and loving hands wipe them away, and life continues. Even at -71 degrees Celsius. Even in the darkest winter. Even at the end of the world. Sweet dreams.